Okay, hello everybody. I'm super excited today. I have a very special guest that I've been following for quite some time. Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Howk. Welcome to the podcast. You don't know, but really it's been, I would say, since I believe it was 2012, it was Dr. Lisle was on a TED show. And that was the first time I heard him talk about the pleasure trap and the bird, and it just blew my mind. And since then, it opened up the whole new world of evolutionary psychology to me. So that's how it started for me. That's how long I've been following you, and of course, eventually got hooked on the Beat Your Genes podcast, which we're going to list for all of my followers later on, and the books and everything that we need to. So I'm sure everybody's going to want to continue to follow and learn more. I have a school for dog trainers. So a lot of the curriculum is based on evolutionary psychology, thanks to you. Because that's how it started for me. Like I knew a little bit, but I just didn't believe that it goes that deep. And especially how, social sciences and how we are made to believe certain things, and like how everybody can be all you can dream of, and completely disregard your genetic makeup and so on. So, but I will leave this for the later conversation. But if you don't mind, just to kind of briefly introduce yourself and your backgrounds and how you got started with this. And
I'll introduce my colleague. My colleague is the lovely and brilliant Dr. Jen Howk, who's with us today. Jen and I had a conversation on the phone about 5 years ago. And from that conversation, after about an hour, I'm like, I'm gonna have to find a way to drag this young lady into my orbit. And so eventually that happened, and now she's my collaborator and my co-author on what a major work that we're writing on evolutionary psychology and on personality, and on sort of how to use that knowledge in a way that's good for you. And so so Jen is a Ph.D. in political science from Harvard University. And, when I visited Harvard once and I heard some lady talking to her husband saying, everybody around here is a genius. And even though that's not true, it's sometimes true. And so I'm just delighted to be with Jen and with you today, and so to introduce Jen to your folks. So her particular, she has many interests, but one of them that I think that you and I talked a little bit about, or we communicated about this, Ivan, is about personality, and probably nothing is more interesting to pet owners than personality, and I think Jen will have a lot to say today about that, not only personality of ourselves and our pets, but also her specific dogs. She's very excited about their personalities. So go ahead, Jen.
Well, sure. Any excuse to display the wonderful personalities of my dogs, who, after all, are carrying on my genetic line. They are my reproductive offspring from a Darwinian point of view, or so it seems to my brain. So I do love to talk about personality and dogs and all things in between. So this is a very appropriate conversation. So I'm really glad to be here. And thank you for that sweet intro. I have to give the flip side of my experience, which was that I was in this sort of the finishing a PhD in social science at this time in history is sort of you're siloed into a very particular academic worldview, and I was parched for truth. I was trying to answer some questions that I was not finding good answers to in the conventional political science literature. And once I discovered evolutionary psychology as a lens to apply some sort of long-standing political questions, everything suddenly it was like the heavens opened up and the harps started to play, and I completely understood. So once you run into this this quality of information and can apply it to your life, whether it's through personality or any lens that you're trying to solve any problem, it's powerful stuff. So certainly had that effect on me.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait. Dr. Lisle, tell us a little bit about your background. How did it all start?
My background was I was just a conventionally trained or classically trained psychologist. So so when I was going through school in the 1980s, we had what has now been termed the standard social science model. And the standard social science model was, you've heard this from philosophers and wise people, that you're the sum total of your experiences. So that's the notion. And so I certainly sort of vaguely believed that, just like anybody else. And so I vaguely believed that a major task of clinical psychology was to sort of work on your weaknesses and sort of get yourself in shape one way or the other psychologically. And so if you weren't very conscientious, not that we even use that term, but if you weren't, then you'd work on it. Or if you weren't very extroverted, you'd work on it. If you weren't very smart, you'd work on it. In other words, one way or the other, sort of the task of life was this process of improvement, and the things that you were improving, there was a notion that everything was essentially flexible, and of course there wasn't really any contrary voices to this, and the notion was that since you're the sum total of your experiences, anybody that walks in your door, if you're a clinician, has the trials and tribulations and the hurts that they have. The reason they're hurting is that they've been injured. You're effectively like an orthopedic physician. If their ankle hurts, then somebody tweaked their ankle. If they've got a bunch of anxiety, then somebody made them scared. Somebody caused them some kind of damage at some point that has led to them having those types of reactions now. And so this is the standard fare, whether it was learning theory that's been around 100 years, or it's a little more of a twisted learning theory of the psychodynamic realm. If we have a Freudian slant on things, then things get a little bit more complicated and fascinating about the reason why you wash your hands because you had overly severe toilet training or something like this. So anyway, again, like Jen was having this experience in the 2000s because she's a young person that was born late. If you were born earlier properly in the 1950s, like myself, then when this is all happening, there's literally nobody knows. And so the literature that Jen would run into that would inform me hadn't been written yet. So I'm going through school in the 1980s, and I am diligently and honestly studying what is known and getting a first-rate education at this. So I'm walking out with my Ph.D. in hand, feeling like, okay, that's the way it is. And it's confusing and frustrating. And there was there's all kinds of jokes about psychologists, like, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. That's the joke is that
that's totally it's my old favorite. I love that one.
So the clients, the notion is that that's the jaded view that, boy, it sure is hard to get people to change, but and it's their responsibility. It's not your responsibility, and et cetera. So this is the notion of what gets derived out of the learning theory tradition. And it's going to turn out that the learning theory tradition, for all intents and purposes, is about 90% wrong. There's 10% of it's in there that gets to live, but it's essentially, at its core, it's actually mistaken. So you are not the sum total of your experiences. You are, what you are is you're essentially a more or less fixed genetic entity. So you can no more become somebody's different personality or character than you can become a different animal. In other words, the individual differences in our DNA are so striking and so important that they actually form the foundation of who it is that we are. And so therefore, strangely and paradoxically, as Jen and I will talk about, it turns out that means that environment is more important than we thought. It means the environment is the only thing that we can change, because we can't change ourselves, okay? So in other words, if you approach psychology from the notion that the task of clinical psychology is to change the individual human, which is essentially the widespread view that goes on in clinical psychology today, which is a derivative of the standard social science model, that model is wrong at the core. So Jen and I don't try to seek to change people. We seek to try to figure out what they need to change about their situations to improve their lives. And that is how our approach is fundamentally different. And both of us counsel people, essentially life coach folks in a wide variety of domains of life. Essentially, nothing's off the table about what we're willing to talk about. But the purpose of our analysis is to try to not figure out what went wrong in your childhood that changed you in some negative way, so that's why you're having a negative thing 25 or 30 years later. No, what we're interested in is what's going on right now in your existence. Who are you fundamentally? And why is there a mismatch between who you are fundamentally and the environment that you find yourself in? That winds up being the most important part of the analytic process that we go through. So, we might ask a person about their history, not because we're interested in what damaged you. We're interested in finding out who you are, okay? So your life history can tell us a great deal about who it is that you are. We're not the slightest bit interested in figuring out how on earth we're going to engineer you to change. We're just trying to figure out how to change your life. Those are two different things.
It's beautiful. Yes, this is why I so wished and I wasn't sure how to approach to invite you to a dog training podcast. And to tell my audience, if you guys are not getting it yet, but you will see the similarities and you will understand pretty quickly how evolutionary psychology starts from single cell organism on to us. We are all biologically programmed to avoid something aversive and approach something that's pleasant. That's just fundamental stuff. And dog training today, what so many trainers call it modern dog training, is still stuck, deeply stuck in the Skinnerian ways of thinking and Watson, and we can make anything through reinforcement and punishment. We can just, so that's kind of why that conversation will be so interesting especially for dog trainers that are truly stuck there. And I hope that it just stimulates them to go deeper and follow you and get some evolutionary psychology books and really get a completely different angle of why we do and what we do and what can be changed and what cannot be changed. Because a big problem in dog training is that it's almost the ego of the dog trainer. It's like, no, I will fix this problem. But not really thinking is it a problem? Where is it coming from? Why is the dog displaying it? All those things, it's like, no, I will reinforce and punish. And if it's not working, I'll just do more. and it becomes, it's, you know, it's, 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 it's it's actually sad to some level to watch dogs suffer and trainers getting frustrated just simply because of lack of knowledge and exposure to a different views of this. And it's really, really, everything comes, I guess it comes from animals and experiments and study with animals back to us. But then it comes back from us to how we train and how we interact with animals. And for whatever reason, we are stuck in the 50s and 60s, and including people that have PhDs and graduated different schools, and there is still this, no, you really can be whatever you want. You just need to, as you said, Dr. Ryle, you gotta try harder. You're just not putting enough. So, but this is the whole evolutionary psychology. Of course, we cannot disregard reinforcement and punishment. It's just the fact is that we cannot change something that it's against your genetical makeup. And the best way to deal with it is to understand why is it there, when it's going to display itself, and can we guide it in some direction that it's beneficial for us, right?
Yeah, I guess the main thing to understand about personality is that it is fundamentally a genetic process. So when we're talking about sort of this nature-nurture debate, whether it's with human animals or any other kind of animal, including dogs, it's really how you were expressing your personality in the moment is just as much your genes as it is the environment that you're looking at right now, not the environment that you grew up with. The environment that you grew up with is not having the kind of effect on our personalities or our dog's personalities in the way that we think it is. The environment that we're in right now does have quite an effect on how we're expressing our personality in the moment. So, I have two dogs. They're both rescue dogs. They're both just kind of these sweet mutts who came to me with all kinds of quote unquote personality problems, personality issues. And most people would say, well, they were rescues, they were street dogs, they did a lot of time in the joint at the pound. And so they had a lot of childhood trauma. They picked up a lot of, this is where their issues come from. They have abandonment issues, they're overreactive to things.
People actually like this. For some reason, we like to make a story that has that kind of story behind.
Yeah, totally. I think people have this very strong intuition that must be true because they infer that it's true about their own childhood and their own lives and all the problems that they have as adults. They can blame their childhood for it rather than it's just kind of a fundamental feature of their personality, and they just kind of are coming into life with certain difficulties that they're not finding the right environment to put themselves in. So just as examples that come to mind, the two dogs could not have more different personalities. They look very similar. You can see one of them in the background snoozing here. The other one's wandering around. Looks like he's giving himself a pedicure right now. So they look very similar. Everyone thinks they're related, but as far as I know, they're not. One of them was a stray in Detroit. His name is Motown. The other one was a pound puppy in Anchorage. So I named her Melville after Herman Melville, the author. Long story. So they are very different on major dimensions that we talk about when we talk about personality. So when we talk about personality, we often talk about something that's called the Big Five, which is these sort of 5 dimensions on which we can really measure people's personality or the personality of animals. And this is, we can talk more about this if you like, and people can look into this and take quizzes online and all of that. It's the acronym spells OCEAN, so it's a really easy way to remember it. So the Big Five are O for openness, how sort of novelty seeking and adventurous you are. C for conscientiousness, that's how rule following and orderly and diligent you are, and well behaved in general. E is for how extroverted you are versus how introverted you are. A is for how agreeable, how easygoing, how cooperative you are. And then N is for neuroticism. So we think of that as sort of how emotionally stable or unstable you are. How excited do you get when someone knocks on the door if you're a dog? Or do you just sit on the couch and stay asleep because it's like, oh, whatever, unless they have food, I'm not that interested. And how anxious do you get if you're a dog when you hear fireworks? How much does that agitate you? So my two dogs, they differ on a lot of dimensions, but they differ a huge amount on emotional stability. Doug can attest to this. He's lived with them before. So my dog Motown, he's very agreeable. So he's very sweet. He's very good natured, but he's very unstable. So he gets extremely excited if we're going on an adventure or something's happening. He's like, he can barely contain himself. He's whining. He's just very, very amped up. And also if something bad is happening, if there's big noises, if people are yelling at each other, if there's fireworks, he can't handle it. He freaks out, shakes, he trembles, he has to go hide. So this is emotional stability. And humans are we have just as much variance on those dimensions as animals do. So a huge part of my job as the person who lives with these animals and tries to give them the best life that I can, and train them at least within a reasonable degree of being fit for public life to some degree, is to give them the best environment for their personality. So it's important for Motown's nervous system that I keep him in fairly quiet places. A lot of neighbors coming and going, banging around, making noise, yelling at each other. That's a really stressful environment for him in a way that it's not as stressful for Melly. She could be fine with that. It wouldn't bug her as much. Mo would just be, every little sound, he'd be all agitated and freaking out. It's important that if I'm going to live with other people, that we have harmonious relationships, that there's not a lot of conflict, because he feels that disproportionately it causes him a worse life experience to be living in a volatile environment. So we are, as humans, we're exactly the same. You wouldn't put a dog in an environment that is ill-suited for it. You wouldn't try to change if you have a cat who gets really skittish every time somebody comes over to visit you, goes and runs off and hides in the laundry room, which a lot of cats do. You don't drag the cat out and say, no, you need to learn to socialize. You need to learn to be more extroverted and to tolerate this because that's good for you. And you're isolating by hiding yourself from company. It doesn't even occur to us to try to do that. But we do that for ourselves all the time. You'll hear traditional therapists say, no, you're hiding from your experiences. It's dangerous to self-isolate in this way. You need to build up your tolerance and change your boundaries, and all of these kinds of ideas that we can somehow make ourselves more comfortable in environments that are really not pleasant or even toxic for us. And of course, we do the same to dogs. We sort of inflict these sorts of things on them and expect them to build a different relationship to a different kind of environment that is just not suited for them.
Yes, that's amazing. That's so. I hope the trainers and my audience really takes notes of this, because it's one of the big problems as a dog trainer is this. Instead of trying to evaluate and really understand what is, if you want to call it, home base for that puppy, and if the puppy is shy and doesn't have that enough, or it's not really a courage, but self-confidence, because courage, we can get to that in a little bit, but and just, it's not social, it's very much aware of everything. And as a trainer, it's immediately becoming this challenge of how good as a trainer I am and how I'm gonna change now this puppy, and just completely, just putting him in situation after situation that clearly there is, his genetic makeup says this is who I am, and all you're doing, it really goes borderline to torturing for no reason, but with the good intentions of, I'm gonna fix this. Instead of trying to understand that a lot of the problems with dog training today is that big gap of understanding what you can change and what you cannot change.
Yeah, and not taking it personally, not making it about you, letting it be about the dog. So I actually struggled with this before I really understood evolutionary psychology. I got both the dogs, 10 years ago, and I sort of, the decade ago, it was sort of this very it was the leadership model, right? Like, are you being a good, I'm not going to name names, but are you being a good leader for your dog? Are they, deferring
Yes.
to
Yes.
your alpha status in the pack? And this is still very hegemonic in thinking out there in the world about dogs. Like, you run into an average person who is not particularly interested in dogs or doesn't know much about dogs or dog training. And I'm not an expert by any means. I just love my dogs and want to do right by them. And that was the kind of ascendant paradigm at the time. Was you had to be a strong leader. You had to show them who was boss. And if they understood that you're boss, then they'll fall into line appropriately. And of course, you want the dog to respect you. You want the dog to, understand that you are, if there are rules, that they're going to, there's teeth behind those rules. But there's a difference between that and this ego-driven process that informs a lot of that. So, when I started, Melly, you wouldn't know it to look at her right now, but she's actually very, very reactive with other dogs. She just has a terrible time. She's, it's a lot better than it used to be, just because we've had more exposure. She's been able to recalibrate a little bit. But I still can't take her on the same kinds of adventures that I can take Motown. It stresses her out. It stresses me out. She picks up on my stress. It makes everybody the poor Motown, who's got the delicate nervous system, knows that everybody's stressed, so he's more stressed. It's just a bad experience. So even though in principle, I would want to have the sort of egoic benefit of being like, oh yeah, I took this damaged animal, this dog that had all this childhood trauma, and I provided such a wonderful training environment for her that I changed her completely, and now she's blossomed and she's able to. This is BS.
So
I've been
classic storyline.
give her. Yeah. So I take her in environments that she's not going to get to the limits of her tolerance. So she can go on hikes, she can come on, experiences and walks, and I can provide that for her. But I'm not going to take her to like a farmer's market where there are a bunch of other dogs around and that, they're off leash, they're running up to her. That's setting her up to fail. It's just setting her up to fail. She might be okay. She might work through it and be okay, but it's going to cause her stress. It's going to make everybody unhappy. It's going to stress out the people at the farmer's market. I'm going to take her to a trail near my house where maybe we'll run into a couple of people with other dogs, but they're on the other side. And I can treat her when she, is paying attention to me instead of them. And I can do that whole thing. And that's fine. It's manageable. So it's all about working with the who you are as a human, who your dog is as a dog, and understanding that people have these kind of thresholds, have this zone of comfort and tolerance. And it's not always a good thing to yank people and push them out of those zones. It doesn't mean that you're not growing as a person or that you're afraid of change or any of these kinds of ideas that we impose on people wanting to be in an environment that suits them. We really need to make progress on that, both in the human realm and the canine realm.
Yeah, and also I think on the other side, as the therapist or as the dog trainer, you cannot blame yourself or take it as a failure, because you cannot go against the genes that you're really making such a, like, you're going in a rabbit hole that you completely, it's not good for you, for your self-esteem as a teacher or as a therapist, or because you really start to believe that, why is it not working? I'm doing everything that I've been told that should work.
Yeah, well, the main way that we run into this, and I know you had mentioned sort of you wanted to get into the idea of the pleasure trap, which is something that we talk a lot about, where when we're talking about personality limitations, we're talking about your personality constraints and how they affect everything in your life, including your the ease with which you can be compliant on a diet. So for some people, if you're trying to get healthy, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to improve your health, it's going to come much more easily to some people than it is to others, not because of some character flaw or, all of this sort of, because of your childhood, your grandma made you cookies. And so now when you get stressed, you want the cookies. this is not how it works. You have personality differences at the genetic level that make you more or less susceptible to falling into certain types of traps around healthy living. And so when we're in the position of trying to coach somebody through that process, you cannot make it about you and how good a coach or a therapist you are and whether that person is successful or not. You have to recognize that they are coming from that wherever they are sitting on these personality dimensions, particularly their level of conscientiousness and their emotional stability and really all of it. But the conscientiousness is really what it all comes down to. You have to have respect for that, and you cannot make it about you, or you are really running down the wrong road.
Yeah, I really would like to go a little bit with that, because that's how I got so interested in evolutionary psychology. I remember like it was yesterday. I haven't listened to that TED show. I haven't seen it in a while, but when Dr. Lau, it was such a fun presentation too, and we will put the links to it as well. But it would be very interesting to talk a little bit about the three fundamental principles of the motivational triad, and like I really would like to cover a little bit of this, because it relates so much in dog training, and just the way we can think about even a bird or something super small organism, how much complicity on a different level. I'll just let you talk about it, because I cannot say anything remotely close to the way you.
What Ivan's describing is we sort of synthesize down a huge problem in human life down to distilled it down to a fundamental dilemma, and that is that essentially we are kind of like moths that are programmed to fly to light. And if it turns out that that light happens to be my front porch, and you happen to be a moth anywhere near it, then probably in the morning I'm going to see you dead on the ground, which I often do. I'll see a dozen little tiny moths dead on the ground. Why is that? And that's because their instincts are designed by nature to fly to the light. So certain stimuli out there are cues that were designed by nature to move toward. So whether it's attractive mates, or whether it's food, or whether it's things that are correlated with that. So for example, a beautiful landscape is actually correlated with safety and food. So that's why we like to look at a landscape that has a bunch of grass and trees. We actually like to look down on that landscape because we like to see that we have a gravitational advantage over predators and competitors. We like to see trees because trees, you can get up in a tree and get a much better vantage point, and also protect yourself from either heat or rain. And you can also possibly eat things that are in the tree, and you can also escape predators in the tree. So it's really no mystery at all why human beings love trees. And that's why if you go into a new subdivision and the houses are 4 feet apart from each other and there's no trees, you have this feeling of, boy, do I not like this. This is a very uncomfortable place to be, even though the insides of the home may be great. The outsides of the home are very unappealing. When you go to a neighborhood where there's big wide lawns and a bunch of trees and a bunch of bushes, this is now mimicking the environments that human beings evolved in on the African savanna, where they were designed by nature to seek out certain stimuli that were correlated with biological success. It's going to turn out that there's, so our aesthetic preferences on any domain, whether it's for mates, whether it's for friendships, so none of us like people that turn out to be thieving, backstabbing flakes. We like people that are pleasant, resourceful, and loyal. Those are natural things that we're looking for. In mates, we like physical characteristics that are associated, incidentally, with low mutation loads, which means that at the fundamental level, we want to reproduce with entities that are going to cause offspring that are going to be very, very biologically stable and more likely to survive, and also then be more likely to reproduce because they're evidencing indications of low mutation load, i.e. good looks. So this is amazing, because what we're going to do is, as we keep circling down through this, it's like a series of Chinese boxes that you open one, and then you open it, and then you inside of it's another Chinese box. Another side, there's another one, and there's another one, and there's another one, and it never ends. And where it's heading down to is it's heading down to a principle of energy conservation. So the reason why we like the people we like is that they actually give us a good deal when it comes to energy exchange. If we invest energy in them and then they betray us, it's like, oh my God, you just inconvenienced me. I just suffered some major losses, i.e. I wasted a bunch of my life energy. Okay, the reason why we seek attractiveness in mates is because it's energy conserving. It's because, in fact, it's not a waste of time to reproduce with them, because the offspring will be viable. This is an amazing insight into the nature of biology. The reason why we like the food we like is we actually like the food best that has the most energy in it. And not only that it has the most energy in it, we like it when it takes the least energy to consume it. That's why we like chocolate shakes and Coca-Cola and hamburgers, because they're very, very soft. That's why a hamburger is the national food of America as opposed to a steak burger. If it was a steak burger, which would be, from industry's point of view, much easier and much more effective to make steak burgers. You just slice the steak and have a little slice there, and it keeps better because you haven't broken down the matrix by putting it through a grinder. But it turns out, no, that's not going to be nearly as appealing to people, because it takes 12% more energy to eat a steak than it does to eat the same amount of calories in a hamburger, or it's been chopped up in little bits and you don't have to work as hard physically to break down the molecular structure. So the point of all this is that you're designed by nature to really do three things, which is to seek pleasure, which, as you were saying, Ivan, things that we move towards. If it's anything that feels pleasant, we're attracted to it. We're designed to move away from things that will cause us pain. So it doesn't have to be, when we stare at a desert landscape, it's not causing us pain to stare at the desert landscape, but we can feel or anticipate the pain that's going to come from starving to death and being hot and being thirsty and being dead. So as a result, we are in fact, our aesthetic preferences are moving us towards pleasure, moving us away from pain. And in doing so, those things are actually designed into our neural circuitry to help us conserve energy, because the whole point is to have actions that will be optimal for survival and reproductive success, irrespective of the fact that human beings try to block reproductive process is not relevant. The neural circuits of all organisms are designed by nature with one and only one purpose, which is to statistically maximize the likelihood of genetic success. And so therefore, all of the aesthetic preferences, and therefore all of the behavioral tendencies of the species, are designed to be highly specifically organized to make sure that that species goes for the things that interacting with those things will cause it to be more likely to successfully reproduce and to survive. So I'm not attracted to dog manure to eat it, because, but a dung fly would be. Okay, so in principle, the organism would be infinitely flexible in its evolutionary tree in terms of what might be pleasant and what mightn't be pleasant. I don't like to eat wood, but termites do. Okay, in fact, it's so specific that if you tried to eat the food that a chimpanzee eats, which is our closest cousin by far in the animal kingdom, you would die, because you can't eat the food that they eat. It would poison you. So each animal is actually a highly specific package of adaptive mechanisms in order to survive with its specific ecological niche. And so cats, for example, are obligate carnivores. They're going to have to eat meat, whereas most even though they're omnivorous, they can't survive on an omnivorous diet. Many omnivores can. So we human beings can absolutely be vegans if they want to be, and it's not a problem at all. But not all creatures are built that way. So the long story is this: the synthesis of all this thinking is that a creature is pretty simple. It seeks pleasure, avoids pain, and conserves energy. Okay, so whenever you're watching any behavior of any human or animal, just think to yourself, what's going on there? It's attempting to seek pleasure, avoid pain, or conserve energy. That, in some, possibly in a human, it could be a very convoluted pathway why it might be doing that. So it might, for example, be, teaching its kid math. Okay, and you're like, well, how is that seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, or conserving energy? And what it is it's designed by nature to try to get the kid to be more successful. If it's more successful, then it gets better grades, then it gets into a better college, gets a better job, makes more money per unit of energy expended. If it does that, it can then display the waste of its ability to earn extra income and therefore attract a mate. The mate that it attracts might be 10% more attractive. Therefore, the genes of the grandchildren might be 5% sexier, and therefore statistically more likely to then take those genes on into future generations. So little do we understand, we have no insight into the knowledge that when we're helping our sixth grader with his math homework, we're actually scheming on him being more competitive sexually 15 years from now. Okay? And so it is in fact pleasure seeking vicariously, and it's energy conservation by derivative. So this is the magnificent integration now of understanding motivation can be now distilled right down through some very core evolutionary principles. And this is what makes our way of looking at things and would make our way of looking at dog training, a unique and different perspective. I was amazed at what you said just a little while ago, Ivan, that you talked about what you were describing is you were literally describing the current field and the past field of clinical psychology. Literally, they're dog trainers. And they are dog trainers attempting to make a genetically shy dog 25% less shy. And they can see that shyness has penalties, that it would be more advantageous for that organism to not be at the 25th percentile of shyness, but to get itself to the 50th percentile. And that therapist has been miseducated in the belief that is their job as a therapist to do that it would be advantageous for that to happen, and that by God, all we have to do is use Skinnerian principles of some kind to get it there, or psychodynamic principles about what's blocking you from this, or how are you self-sabotaging. So this is a profound misunderstanding, but we can actually see it amusingly and clearly through the lens of dog training. It's like, wow, that's what these people are. They're misinformed dog trainers trying to teach a dog tricks that is not consistent with its natural repertoire.
Yeah, no, that's exactly true. I mean, it's that's what drew me to listening to Beat the Genes, your podcast, and all you need to do is replace therapist with trainer and person with the animal, and on top of that, all the experiments and all the studies. It's just mind blowing. So much beauty and knowledge, and once you have it in your head, then you look at how typically those things are viewed and dealt with, and it's just like why are we not moving forward? What's going on? Like why do we not want to accept this? Like there is something with social sciences for sure, right? I mean, there is something, but there is definitely a problem with this. I don't know if you guys want to get there or not. That's, but there is something that I just,
Yeah, this is something that this was one of the things that vexed me when I was in grad school. I was working on a dissertation where this question was coming up, and it was sort of in the context of why are we blaming ancient history for current problems? So there's this idea very dominant in a lot of social science about ancestral trauma, sort of ancestral, the things that happened to your ancestors 3 generations ago were responsible. That's why you have the problems that you have today. It's why you have the personality that you have today. And this just didn't pass the basic sort of sniff test for me. It just didn't. I kept asking, I kept going to these seminars being like, what's the mechanism? How is this, explain to me how something that happened in the 17th century is affecting the daily life of somebody who's living today. Like, how does this work? I really want to understand this process. And I just couldn't find any evidence for it. I kept searching and couldn't find it. But it's such a dominant paradigm, and sort of the derivatives of it. We can look to our early experience for any kind of issue that we face, any kind of competitive struggle that we're having. So, we're not getting the we don't have the salary that we think we deserve. We haven't reached the level of achievement in our chosen profession. We don't have our wife isn't as hot as we would hope that she is. Like, all of these things we sort of blame on something went wrong early in our life, or even more, sort of invisibly, something has gone wrong further down the line that is affecting my ability to be my best self in the present moment. And it just didn't fly. It just didn't make sense. And so the more I looked into it, the more I realized that there is no evidence for this. And so exactly the same question came up. Why do we remain so attached to this notion? Why are we so devoted to this idea instead of looking at the reality of the situation? And so whenever you're confused by something, there's a very nice little mantra, which is to follow the money. And in political science language, we follow the incentives. So what would be the incentives in the social sciences and in the sort of in modern psychology? And it's because both parties are very incentivized to continue playing these roles. And so it is very financially lucrative for the psychologists who are sort of taking you back through all of the bad things that happened to you early in life, to keep you in this kind of victimhood spiral that, if we just look at all of the things that have gone wrong, then you don't have to take this radical responsibility for who you are right now and the liabilities that perhaps you do have in your personality, but to look at those very squarely and take responsibility for them, and then choose your environment accordingly to optimize your circumstances. It's much easier. It's much easier, and it makes much more money to look at things that we cannot change, at the past, and to sort of like outsource our responsibility and our blame in that way. And we have over time created all of these strongly now institutionalized incentives to continue doing that. It's a big mess, and it's deep in our sort of avoidant, energy conserving natural history and just the sort of how the species is wired. And it's also supported by a vast array of a psychological industrial complex that now supports it. And I think you see it across, you see it in psychology, you see it in academia, and it sounds like you see it in dog training. So that's amazing to us to hear that is true, but not particularly surprising.
Yes. Yeah, it really, it's the similarities are beyond, it's like identical. Yes, including even like in the last 10, 15 years, it's so popular right now to make studies, and all these studies basically are saying one thing, and it's the same thing over and over, but it's just every new graduate, it's just so repetitive and nothing new comes out. And on top of that, they try to tell you that this is, here is the data and how it's working. The cool thing about real dog training is we have competitions. We have actual real life tests to put it in practice. So when you make a study and you get the group of dogs and you do everything and whatever your outcome you want to make it, of course you can. If you want to just see where the study is going to take you, of course you can. But ultimately, once you present the findings, then all of these dog trainers can just take it to the training field and test it on their own. They don't need, it's not like it's a much simple way as a dog trainer to deal with this. And we really see it very directly that it's just a BS. And it's like, why are you wasting money and why are you getting money for something that clearly is not working, and you're trying to say that's working, but it's like, because like with dog training, it's interesting. I mean, dog trainers can be pretty fanatics of we spend money, we go places to learn, and anything new that comes out, especially if you're in some competitive field. Like if I know that there is a certain way, let's say somebody in Hong Kong right now is training dogs and is super successful and is doing something different. Well, guess what? Quite a few of us will be flying. And I would not care that it's COVID. I will find a way. I will take the quarantines. I'll deal with it. But I will be there. I will learn this. And yes, it's a very, very big problem with how we are stuck on we can change something. Like we can, and probably it's similar with the work you do in that way. Like, we can say, yeah, okay, well, the dog has the problem. We're going to put it in this differential reinforcement program, and we're going to make a big plan. But it's going to take a while. And next thing you know, it's like 6 months, a year, 2 years. The dog's lifespan, by the time it's 8 years old, and you're still trying to go on the right path, seeing that there is just no result, there is no improvement whatsoever, but you still, the belief that you're doing the right thing is so overwhelming, and it keeps you going. And on top of that, you're finding yourself in this kind of ideology circle that if somebody's trying to convince you that this is not the right path and that you're wasting your time, it makes you even stronger more persistent to follow it, and seeing no results. It's the amazing part.
Yeah, and you're undermining the life experience of that animal. You're not working with it, you're working against it. So you're creating circumstances that are chronically stressful and unsatisfying, and just again setting the dog up to fail in whatever reality you're trying to impose upon him. And I mean it's inescapable to make the comparison to parenting, which is something that we talk a lot about too. So you're going to see a lot of overlap with the sort of parenting industrial complex, which is also based on this complete, blank slate idea that you can shape your child into whoever it is that you think would be best for that child to be. We have these ideas that we bring to our parenting relationships, to our relationships with our animals that live with us or that we're training, to clients therapeutically, to students in schoolrooms. We have all of this egocentric bias about what would be best for our subject. We get all of our ego wrapped up in the idea. We have all of this half-baked evidence that we bring to apply to the problem, and then we take it very personally if our subject continues to fail at the threshold that we have assigned to them to succeed, rather than tuning into what actually is the best environment, the best situation, the best expression of this individual creature, this individual child. Who are they really, and who do they want to be, and how can we support them in that by taking away things that are going to create all of these sources of stress for them.
Yeah, that's just it's amazing. I mean, it's really amazing, because instead of like really like looking at a puppy and the trainer will be just purposefully just not blinking, trying to find something that's the puppy is worried about, something that the puppy is not good at, to start to work with, instead of trying to see what that puppy can shine with, what it can flourish, and where is that personality going to take him. So ultimately, you actually make a so much more fulfilled life and purposeful life when you follow your talent and instinct, and this is what you're good at. You're athletically built and you have the love to run. You don't want to sit in front of a computer. Yes, we can make you sit in front of the computer, but you will not like it. And there is nothing we can do to make you like it, right?
Yeah. This is exactly how we would approach it if you were a gardener. You don't try to convince your plants. You don't try to force your, I'm not a gardener, so I can't actually give specific examples of specific plants. But if you had some sort of flower that, really does not like direct sunlight, it just is going to wilt under direct sunlight. It's too much for it because it's much more of a temperate flower. You're not going to go put it in full sunlight and expect it to just get more resilient. It's gonna adapt. It's gonna build up a tolerance. Like, you're gonna kill the flower, or you're at the very least you're going to give it a much less happy life experience in its little flower life than it otherwise would have had. We don't think, it doesn't cross our mind to try to do that with a plant. So if you are just as much of a potted plant as the things that you're trying to grow on your porch. You have very fixed personality characteristics. So do your dogs. So does everyone else that you meet. It doesn't mean that people can't express themselves differently according to circumstances. So, we can take somebody and with great incentives or great coercion, we can move the expression of their personality within a range. So with enough threats, with enough punishment, you can get a dog to be very sort of, constrained in its behavior and afraid of you, basically. You can, of course, force any animal into that sort of circumstance. Or you can, put enough carrots in front of it, incentivize it enough that you can get it to do almost anything, but you haven't changed its personality. You haven't actually, you're not working with what that creature really finds joyful and at its highest expression of itself. You've got like a dancing monkey that you're sort of incentivizing and constraining in very specific ways for that moment in time. Just like you can take a hardened criminal and put them in prison, and under penalty of great coercive threat, they are going to get in line. They're not going to be starting prison riots every day because it's going to be a world of hurt for them to do so, even though in principle they would very much like to. And Doug can certainly speak to this particular example. He's worked with these populations before. So people and animals can be shaped and put into these little boxes of behavior that they feel that they have to stay in for whatever set of reasons is specific to that moment. But they are potted plants. You are a potted plant. And if you don't like direct sunshine, don't put yourself in a situation where you're being exposed to direct sunshine all the time. Find yourself a little shade. Get yourself into situations that are working with your nervous system, that are helping you. We have this other concept that we talk about all the time, which is, it has even more urgency in the life of a dog because they live so much, less hours than we do. But humans don't have that much time. We call it 100,000 hours. So, if you're sort of late middle age, that's about what you're looking at for the rest of your existence. For the rest of your waking hours, you have about 100,000 hours that you're going to experience. So how are you spending those hours? Are you spending those hours in situations that are fundamentally unpleasant to you, that cause great stress to you because you think it's going to somehow make you into a better person? Or are you subjecting your child or your dog to, you've got a kid that hates piano lessons, but you keep insisting that they go to their piano lessons because it's good for them and it'll teach them discipline and they'll learn to like it and they'll thank you later. Like you are robbing that childhood of those hours that they could otherwise be doing something that would genuinely bring them great joy. And the same thing with the dog. Like, I have this one very athletic dog, and he doesn't see very well now. He's lost an eye along the way. And So he's not as athletic and agile as he once was, but he used to be, great sprinter and you could catch anything that you threw in the air. And that gave him great joy to have that sort of experience. The little couch potato behind me, that is not the case, but she's very, very excited and willing, and it gives her great joy to learn something new. So some new little tricks, some new little, as long as it doesn't take too much exertion, she loves to be in that process of learning something new and being rewarded for it and having that positive feedback cycle, where he's just not as inclined to that. He would love to just romp and express himself differently. So it has been part of my task as the human custodian to these creatures to give them sort of separate parallel environments that give them different things that incentivize and create joy for them in very different ways, because it's not the same. I can't give them the same household. If they were my children, I would be very mindful of what creates joy in this being and how can I facilitate it to the best of my ability. That's your job. That's your job as the custodian of an animal or yourself or your child or anything.
Yeah, but it's still a problem, even with, starting from home, starting from a kid, as you said, with your parents saying, you will play tennis, no, you will play the piano, all the way until you get a job and you still don't know who you are and what you want, because along the way you got so confused that you never even thought to look at yourself, what you're good at, who you really are. And with dogs is even more interesting in some ways, because we breed dogs selectively. So if you want a dog that's gonna do sled dogs, like mushing, then you pick up a certain dog. And even then there is a chance that genetically may not be, but the high percentage of a chance that the dog's gonna enjoy running in the woods, pulling a sled, are much, much higher than some different breed. And that, with dog trainers, that should already be a really something that's just right in your face, like there is selection. And we can select a dog that can be that loves to do protection sports, for example. So yes, if you take that dog and keep it in a different environment, and that dog genetically wants to do this kind of sports, then you look at it as a problem, and it becomes a problem only because it actually was selected genetically to be that dog, but we put it in the wrong environment, and immediately now we look at it as a problem. And the other way around.
It's amazing.
Yes. And of course, with people, we cannot do that, but with dogs, it's easy. It's like, okay, you want this dog that's going to be easygoing, that you're going to go to the concert, you're going to sit down, and everybody's going to walk around, and, the dog's going to have a blast and not going to stress out, it's not going to freak out. Or you have a dog that is just genetically weaker and not so self-confident. And are we gonna fix it? And there is this big mission from one trainer to another trainer to a behaviorist, then through the whole medication process, which I don't know how you feel about that, but this is another big, very popular and very, doctors make so much money of prescription, every month, and even there is no even studies, there is not enough data that these things ever have worked. But there is dog after dog after dog, and they don't know how to evaluate the dogs. It's like, oh yeah, let's write a prescription and come next month and you're on a plan now. It's a very common procedure.
What are they writing prescriptions for?
It's a psychotropic medications, very much. Oh yeah,
Anxiety.
very much the same as you would have in your field. very much.
It's the same whenever I've, reported any kind of behavioral issue to my vet, it's like, oh, well, separation anxiety. So here's some drugs to fix that. Or, it's this very sort of, we're going to manage it. And I know enough, as somebody I've had therapists trying to shove psych meds at me since I was a kid with every sort of little passing bad mood. Well, we can fix that with some Prozac. No, you can't. No, you can't. That's a bigger conversation that we can have. But it's, what I think, having this conversation, we would never, even with cats, we don't really get this far. We're sort of, if you've got a nervous, skittish cat who's scared of visitors, you just assume that that's the cat's personality. You don't even think twice about it. You certainly wouldn't think twice about it if you had an aquarium with different types of fish and one of the fish hides under a rock all the time and you never see it swimming around. It's like, oh yeah, that's how that fish is. That's pretty much how that whole species is. So we don't have this dissonance with most animals, but with dogs, it's a little too close to us. And we have this sort of proxy parent relationship where we take it all very personally and we start to project our own experience onto the dogs because we're sort of this co-evolved species and we are very close to them and they are sort of living with us and sharing our lives. And I think it starts to those boundaries start to get very fuzzy. And we start to think that we can apply the same kind of misguided blank slate principles to dogs that we can apply to ourselves, because for some reason we believe that it works with ourselves. In part, we believe that it works with ourselves because the other scenario is a little depressing and unthinkable, and most people don't want to deal with it, i.e. you're not being as successful in life for reasons that you can't blame on distant forces that ruined you. So, if you can't blame your parents for your failures in life, then you have to say who's left to blame. It starts to become this kind of, we don't want to go there. Most people don't want to go there. So because we can't go there for ourselves, we don't want to go there with our dogs. I grew up in Alaska with the Iditarod, of course, and the mushing dogs. And when I was a kid, there was a musher who had a team of poodles, and it was like this novelty thing. And everybody recognized that it was a novelty thing, that these obviously were not, standard poodles are not suited for a 1,000-mile trek across the Alaskan wilderness in February. Like, this is not something that you're going to, so it was, at that time, it was transparently sort of just a shtick, and he was out for the sponsorship and everything.
But by the way, I know that exact story, and what happened after. Right now, all the mushing in all the sled dog races are strictly for the northern breeds. It's not allowed to try to go with the poodles right now, simply because we recognize that they're not selectively genetically. They cannot enjoy this long race. Like,
they don't have the stamina.
Yes,
They don't.
yes.
It doesn't speak to their soul
Yes.
in the same kind of way that it does if you get a Malamute out there. Like, I've been on the trail. I'm not a big supporter of the Iditarod for my own reasons, but I've met those dogs, and you can't deny that those dogs are experiencing quite a bit of joy in that process. That is what they are born to do. They are born to run. They are born to work. They are born to pull. That is what they have been aggressively selected and bred for. So they are fulfilling their species being destiny in some sort of real way, whether that can translate into the extreme sport that the Iditarod and other races have become, and the continued pressure to demand more and more from those dogs to run shorter and shorter races and everything else that goes along with that. We can have a separate debate about that, but they clearly, those dogs are having a great time for the most part, and poodles would not.
Correct.
Correct. My dogs would not. My dogs would scratch before they even left the starting line. So I don't care how many little pieces of salmon you're dangling in front of them, how much you're incentivizing them, they're not going to have a good time.
That it's a very interesting, like, also the like when we bring up the puppy, or when we just as a when you're competing in dog sports, and sometimes you just have this idea that, I mean, it's not a bad thing that you dream high, because if you don't dream high, chances are you will not accomplish, because you don't have that goal. But at the same time, you have to recognize and try to stay somewhat realistic of who you are and where you are in the group of everybody. Kind of like the ego trap that you talk about so often, to where the kid or the puppy grows up and it's been told that you're really good. I mean, you're just as good, if not better than everybody else, until the day comes that a reality check hits in. And how do you face this? And for the dog and for a competitor, this is very hard. Like we train dogs, but we also train the dog owners how to compete. And a lot of times in our industry, it's very common that, you know, in order to keep your clients, you keep pumping them up and you keep telling them how much talent they have and everything. Then they go to one competition, they don't do well. They go to another competition, they don't do well. Now we start to find excuses, and of course there is always excuses, right? When the reality is, this is where you are, that's your lane. Like, you just simply cannot be there. And it's unfortunate, because if that person or if that dog, we understand their limitations, then we can allow happiness to come in and enjoy where you are, instead of trying to be something you cannot be, right? And with dogs and competitors, this is it's really become very similar analogy to the mom with the piano and the kid, or the tennis courts. It's like, no, we just need to do it harder, and we need to sacrifice more, and we're gonna be there. Why are we thinking like this? Like, where does that coming?
There's all kinds of problems. You're talking about a number of issues, but one of them, a major issue, is that unhappiness, a source of unhappiness, is when our current feedback from the world is less than we think that it could be or should be. So you're designed, just as you're designed to have a pleasant feeling looking at a pretty landscape, you're also designed to have an unpleasant, cold, foreboding feeling looking at an ugly landscape. And so you're designed by nature then, if you're looking at an ugly landscape, to start looking for a better landscape, because you want that feeling of saying, okay, now this is now a good set of circumstances. And not only that, you also have an estimator in your head that can say, you know what, we've been looking at a lot of landscapes for a lot of years. This is more or less about as good as it gets. Okay, so it could be better. There could be some little niche valley somewhere that's 15% better. But when we feel good about a landscape, it's because we feel like, okay, this is pretty darn good. I can feel this. Okay? Now, those are automated value judgments that are built into the system. So you're designed by nature to analyze ecological conditions through your senses, to put those through a very sophisticated values calculus, and to know. The same thing is true in looking at mates. Nobody has to teach you what's a good-looking mate and what isn't a good-looking mate. You know, and you know it intuitively, and you know it immediately. In fact, we know that it's so good, you know, in literally 1/7 of a second, people's estimations on those things are highly reliable. Okay, so these are automated value judgments, and value judgments means things are comparative. Things are comparative means when it comes to contest issues for humans, it means they're competitive. Okay, so it means that we sit within competitive ecological niches, and those ecological niches are romance, friendship, and commerce. Those are the three inherent competitive buckets that human beings have to compete in. Now, you can choose to not compete, but if you choose to not compete, then you will not be awarded any relationships in those areas. In other words, you are forced into those competitions, whether you want to be in them or not. Now, you're designed by nature to feel good when the feedback that we get from any of those domains is consistent with what it is that we feel like is a good situation for us. And so it's like looking at a good landscape. We've been wandering in the desert, and now it gets better, it gets pretty good, and we're like, thank goodness. Now my nervous system is giving me feedback that tells me that I'm in a good location. The same thing happens in any competitive domain. If you feel like, you're working awfully hard for $13 an hour, but you feel like you should be making 16 or 18 because you've got some friends that aren't any smarter than you are and aren't any more knowledgeable than you are, but they're making $18 an hour and you're making 13, then you're feeling like you're in the desert. You're in a money desert, and you're essentially in a commerce esteem desert. You are not being valued that much, and you're frustrated. Now, if you go across the street, apply, give them your resume, and they say, great, we like your experience, we'll start you at $18 an hour. Okay. Now we feel a lot better. So now the feedback that we've gotten is consistent with our personal estimation about what it is that we think is reasonable for us. So what's going to happen is that we have a natural estimating equipment that we have. This natural estimating equipment is pretty well outlined by Albert Bandura, a famous Stanford professor, writing 50 years ago. He calls it self-efficacy. So essentially, we can have a feel for about where we think we should stand with respect to a competitive arena. Now, it's not an equilibrium. In other words, we may try. We think, that we sometimes a delight happens when we don't think we can jump over that 3-foot high jump, but it turns out we go up there scared and we do it. And we're like, whoa, I didn't know I could jump over it, okay? Some guy hits on a pretty girl in his history class, and he feels like it's at the upper range of his trading range, and she agrees to go out with him and seems excited about it. Hey, it's a great day in the neighborhood when our feedback exceeds our expectations. But it's going to turn out that that's going to be rare. What's going to happen is that human beings are designed to be generally sitting in a low-grade frustration where they feel like, if I hustle a little bit and put some energy in and basically put myself in a better competitive situation, I'm going to get better feedback. So they're designed, a human and an animal is designed by nature to constantly be scanning and plotting how it could use its energies in order to improve its circumstances. So in humans, that's in mating, it's in friendship, and it's in trade. So in this case, it is, how can I go from 7th in the dog show to getting on the podium? Okay, so the nervous system looks at it, and it doesn't likely set its target at gold, not if it's in 7th place. It's setting it at improving and climbing because it looks at the people that are 6th and 5th, and it says, you know what? They don't have any secret sauce that I don't have. If I work harder and I work smarter, I'm going to be able to climb this dominance hierarchy and earn more esteem. So that's how it works. Now, that's all fine. So the normal natural motivation says, what can I work on harder and better in order to climb a hierarchy in order to gain more esteem? However, we have a very interesting trap that sits in the middle of this path. And that is that if somehow, which is not difficult to do, somehow the expectations become unrealistically high. So if some parent or some coach or some feedback system basically puts the bar higher and says, oh, yeah, you're 7th now, but I think that you could be the world champ. Okay, or you could be the best in San Jose. That dog could be the best dog in San Jose. Now what we've done is we've now put the bar at a place where the person's estimating equipment, their innate, very sophisticated self-efficacy equipment, doesn't believe that that's true. So the fact that somebody else believes it's true, but we don't believe it's true, now sets up a very, very troublesome dynamic, what I call the ego trap. So now what happens is that if we don't think that that's possible, then we have highly conflicted motivation about even attempting it. Because if we try really hard, so parents and coaches and therapists and success people all have a very twisted misunderstanding about the proper place for motivation. From where they sit, their attitude is just try as you can, and whatever happens, happens. Just do your very best, and wherever you land, you land. And that's bullshit. From the standpoint of the individual that's hearing that message, what they're hearing is that you've got nothing to lose by giving your very best. But that is not true. Because if there's been a signal that says that we think that you could win gold, then if you do not win gold by doing your very best, and you in fact take 8th place at the next Olympics, you will have lost tremendous status, because the people that have signaled to you that they thought you could win gold basically are signaling that they think that your DNA is the best DNA on earth. And when it turns out that your DNA is the 8th best DNA, which is about where you were this time around when you took 7, then it means that you lose status or esteem with those individuals. And if you are estimating that it is very likely that they have overestimated your DNA, then you are in no rush to disillusion them. Because by having that status, it is a useful lever over resources. Who is going to give the $1 million contract to the smiling blonde skier? The firm that thinks that she could win gold, or the third firm that now knows that she took 7th? Answer: the people that think that she could win gold. So therefore, she's highly motivated to never be in that Olympic Games, and to sprain her ankle 1 week beforehand, and to tragically be the heartbreak kid that isn't even in the games, but could have been. Okay? So this trap is easily set. It's set routinely millions of times a day around the world by parents, coaches, therapists, dog trainers, everything else under the sun. In other words, setting expectations overly high for the individual puts a countervailing, avoidant, and procrastinating instinct activated, and is counterproductive, and it is a major cause of human self-destruction. Now, the solution to the problem is to shut your big mouth and do not, if you're the therapist or coach, we don't hype and we don't put the bar high. Our goal is to say, you know what, I don't have any idea what your upper limit is. Okay, we may be close to that upper limit now. And what we're going to do, though, is we're going to find out. And there's no secret sauce. All there is fundamentals. And our job is to work these fundamentals. You don't lose 100 pounds, people. I have a lady that this year lost 120 pounds. She didn't lose 120 pounds. She lost about 5 or 6 ounces a day. Mm-hmm. Okay, that is the only way it's done. So she was losing essentially 1/4 of an ounce an hour. 1/4 of an ounce is a thimbleful in this tiny little cap that goes on top. So every hour that she made a good decision, she lost a little tiny bit of fat. That's what happened. And after a year, if I sit here and I do that little thimbleful literally 1,000 times, 3 decisions times 333 days, okay, on decision making of what she's going to eat. There's every time she does that, there's a tiny little thimbleful, and if we do that 1,000 times, guess what I've got? I've got 120 pounds of fat. That all big achievements are nothing but little tiny achievements strung together. And when we coach people, our job is to actually focus on nothing other than the fundamentals, and with an adventurous attitude towards we don't really have any idea where it's going. Okay? The hell with the idea of going for the gold. If you are very close and you have calibrated processes that can tell you that you are gold medal class in something, then I don't have to talk that into you. You already know it. Okay? But the BS of parents, coaches, teachers, administrators, and everybody else that is going to essentially plug a bunch of hype. What you do with people is you push them into a motivational crisis where the best solution is to actually activate avoidance circuitry, which gets you out of doing your very best. You want to self-handicap. You want to self-destruct because you want to have an excuse why it is that you are falling short of expectations. And so that is the ego trap. I knew that you were interested in us discussing that. That is a wide angle lens on what this is. I wanted to say something kind of quickly. I want to add something. Jen and I are very firm and very unusual in our insistence that our personalities are genetic and therefore limited. You won't see this written anywhere. You won't even see it written in the literature that we would cite. Let me explain to you what that literature is so that people understand that this is not an opinion. Okay? What we are actually describing here is scientifically verified fact. And the facts have been verified by more than 14 million pairs of people have been investigated worldwide in the last 30 years. There is no doubt about that what I'm going to tell you is fact. We first discovered that personality was genetic in the mid-1980s. And it was done through 92 pairs of monozygotic or identical twins that had been separated at birth in the state of Minnesota and then raised apart. They had been born from the 1920s on. In the 1980s, a set of investigators at the University of Minnesota went to track these people down. And when they found them, often they were found within 100 miles of each other, obviously, because they were adopted from the same location. But sometimes they were thousands of miles apart because life takes people away from Minnesota. It takes them to Seattle and Florida and Los Angeles and to Mexico City. There's no telling where people might wind up. But what they then did was they then looked at how similar they were relative to how two unrelated people would be related. Two unrelated people's correlation coefficients on intelligence, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism is 0. You correlate 0 with a random member of the population of the world. That's the whole point. You don't have anything in common with them other than that you're a human. But your personality, if I know something about your brother, that doesn't tell me anything at all about the guy next door. Nothing. So if your brother is an extreme introvert, and you say, well, what does that mean about the guy next door? Nothing. Okay, my best guess about what the guy's next door personality is on introversion extroversion is that he's in the middle of the graph. That's the best guess I've got. So the question is, if two people are unrelated and they are raised together, two adopted people, if they're raised in the same house, how alike are they? The answer is 0. They raised by the same parents, the correlation coefficient between those two people is 0. If an older brother is very extroverted, what is the odds that the younger brother will be either introverted or extroverted? Answer, there is no relationship whatsoever. Okay, none. You do not improve your ability to predict if a person is extroverted, intelligent, open, conscientious, neurotic, anything at all. You can't predict anything what their older adopted sibling is because there's no relationship. Okay, now, If those two people were genetically related, monozygotic twins separated at birth and had nothing to do with each other for 47 years, and they meet in the office of a psychologist at the University of Minnesota, those two people are unbelievably similar. They are eerily similar. And if you measure them, one of them will be a little more extroverted than the other today on the test. And one of them's IQ will be 2 or 3 points higher than the other today on the test. But they will be extremely similar. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you bring them back a year later, the one that was a little bit more extroverted on the test a year ago is no more likely to be overly more extroverted as they are likely to be less extroverted a year later on the test. There is no relationship between if they're a little bit higher, it doesn't predict anything about that test a year later, which means that the differences that you see between two monozygotic twins are completely unpredictable.
Yeah.
Which means they are not personality differences. It means the personalities are essentially identical. Their intelligences are identical. Their characteristics are identical. They are not exactly the same person because at this moment in time, they occupy slightly different environments. So one of them is in a really nice, loving relationship. The other one's married to a bitch. And as a result, their anxieties are a little different, okay? So when you test them out today, they look a little bit different. But the truth is the personalities aren't different. As Jen would say, the personality expressions are different. As they're living in different environments. These, what I've reported to you, you can verify for yourself in the magna opus of behavioral genetics. It is a book called Blueprint, published by the most famous, most decorated behavioral geneticist in the world, a man by the name of Professor Robert Plomin. So he will say things like, education matters, or education is important, but it doesn't matter. What he's saying is, it's an important part of the life process, but it won't make a single bit of difference as to how smart your kid is or how well they're going to do in college.
Yes.
Okay? Parenting is important, but it doesn't matter. What does he mean? It means that parenting is just, Jen was describing with her dogs, she's a parent to the dogs. Her job is to help them enjoy their process. But it doesn't matter in terms of moving who they are as dogs. She's not going to move who they are as dogs by 1%. They're going to stay exactly the same to the day they die. Okay? So what we want to do with people and with dogs, or essentially anything, it turns out that the dog's personalities are every bit as genetic as human personalities, which turn out to be genetic. So that means that what we want to do with people is to understand who they are and then to figure out what situations we want to put them in to make them excited. If they're competitive and they love to compete and they want to elbow people to the top of the dominance hierarchy, great, then we do that, okay? If they're shy and quiet, we put them where it's shy and quiet. If it turns out it's exciting and interesting and challenging, we put them there. If they love to bang on the piano, we put a piano in front of them. But if they don't like to bang on the piano, for God's sakes, let's not make them do it. What a total waste of time. So that's I wanted to make sure that we had covered and understood the depth of the knowledge that sits behind our opinion is unshakable and will not be overturned by any modern BS that fights against us. People don't like the notion that their children are limited, okay? Here's how your children are limited. Their height, okay? Their intelligence, their personality characteristics, their character. These things are all limited. Here's what isn't limited, okay? The variance of their happiness. That's what's not limited. You can make them miserable by putting them in lousy circumstances that will make their life experience miserable, or we can help engineer situations that makes their life experience extremely benign and pleasant. That is where we have the control. We don't have the control over how brilliant and how many blue ribbons they get.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yes.
Please, so I like Jen to always weigh in when I go on a rant, because she a lot of times has little loose ends that I've forgotten, and she paints it better. Jen, tell us what else comes to mind for you out of this.
No, that covers it beautifully. I think you said 14 million pairs of twins, and it's actually 15 million. I think in the meta study that Floman's reporting about, and that was a couple of years ago. So the irony is that we sort of are doubling down on this blank slate view of looking at human nature and human potential culturally at the very moment that we have stronger and stronger, more powerful, and just more quantity of evidence from this genetic perspective. So everything that Doug is saying is like, it's not even controversial really to make this point if you know the literature, but it's incredibly controversial just in a practical cultural sort of way to say something, as crazy as, oh yeah, our personalities are much more nature than nurture. It's almost entirely nature. Nurture, these sort of these cryptic things that people Plumman will say about, I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, that parenting is important but doesn't matter, matters but isn't important.
He says that parents matter but they are not important, or parents are important but they don't matter. It was one or two.
Nobody knows quite what this means, but it's I think of this as it however we want to phrase it. It matters to the existence of Motown, my nervous dog, if I live in a loud apartment where people are setting off fireworks in the street every day. That makes him miserable. It's a terrible experience. He's going to be agitated and barking and freaked out all the time. It's a much more pleasant experience for him to be in a calm, quiet space where he has a soft place to sleep and nobody's screaming at him. So that is, there's subjective importance there, but it doesn't make him less likely to react the next time he hears fireworks. So if we gave him a personality test, he's going to score differently on how anxious he is, depending on whether he's living in the house with the fireworks outside, or if he's living in the country mansion with the nice little old lady who gives him the cushy bed and really nice kibble every day. So he's going to just be having a better time. He's going to be enjoying his life more. Everything's just going to be more calmed down in that moment. But he can move across the continuum depending on what's going on in his life. So the environments that we provide our children, or provide our animals, or provide our goldfish, you don't have dirty water for the goldfish that it's struggling to breathe and it's having a miserable life experience. It doesn't change who the goldfish is, depending on whether it has a little plastic castle to swim around and entertain itself, or clean water, fake flowers, or anything. But it certainly does provide a better life experience for that goldfish. So this is what it all comes down to, and we have to realize that is the same lens that we have to view our own lives and our own happiness through is really finding what is that environment? What does that look like? How do we, why are you wasting your 100,000 hours in some job that you hate? Like, what is the distortion that is leading you into that life rather than doing the things that would give you authentic joy? And this is a lifelong reflection process. There are no easy answers for understanding who am I really, what really brings me happiness. It requires a lot of honesty, a lot of introspection, a lot of experimentation. You don't really know until you get into it. You get the data for yourself through experimenting and through trying out different things. And this is what life is all about. So we can't tell you quite what that environment looks like for you, and you probably don't know yourself, but you can discover it through the process of living.
Wow. And it's really like, but with the dogs and the dog trainers, that whole industry, it's the ego of I can fix something, and even if there is nothing to fix, it's like, no, I will make a difference. I am such a good dog trainer that I can make a dramatic change in your dog, instead of trying to look at the dog and see, what do you like, what do you want to be, What can you enjoy?
It's such a insult to the dog. It's such a like crime against that dog's life to put yourself in that the sort of role where it's about you and it's not about the dog. It's about the dog. It's about their life. It's like they have their limited experience on planet Earth. Let's try to make it as joyful and as productive and happy for them as we possibly can, just like we would want to do for our kids or our friends or ideally for ourselves.
So it must be frustrating in your field, knowing what you know. And I mean, even like, how would you address a client to bring it back to home base and say, let's see who you are and let's see what you like, instead of, putting this tremendous pressure on yourself and ultimately knowing that it's gonna break down, and it's because this would be very similar to why pet owners will start to seek a dog trainer, because the dog has a problem, and the dog has whatever the genetic makeup is, whatever it wasn't something that it's right. I mean, genetics are not acquired by experience from yesterday what you did, but in the like as a pet owner, you always read that no, we can do some magic with positive reinforcement, or we can just punish and suppress, or there is the both extreme, which neither one can succeed against the genetic makeup, but it's a big sell, and there is this quest of almost every pet owner that the dog is a little bit shy, like you open a soda in the can pops and the dog gets startled. It's like, oh, we need to fix this. Well, no, you're not going to be able to fix this, but somebody will tell them that we can fix it, and then they're going to put it on a program, and now it's going to just roll into a madness. Exactly.
It's a lucrative process. It's a lucrative process in therapy, in the parenting industrial complex too. So this is, it's an endless. You have endless people who are really susceptible to this notion that, transformation is possible if I just have the right magic beans. And so we're just wired to kind of like, it's energy conservation, to go back to what Doug was talking about. We really want to, because we are fundamentally beholden to this competitive process. It's we want to be we want to display our gene quality to the world. We want to be the best that we can possibly be. We want to do it with the least amount of effort that we possibly can. And it just makes us very susceptible to an easy deal or to something that we haven't tried before. If somebody's got a method, somebody's got some information that we haven't come across that could make a huge difference in our competitive standing, or our dogs, we're going to be very inclined to bite on that, because it's just very, very compelling for everything that matters as far as our inference around our survival and reproduction capabilities. And so we have this weakness. We're very drawn to it, and there's no shortage of people who are willing to sell us transformation in a bottle, transformation in a program. It's a two-way street where there's buyers and sellers, and as long as we have this misunderstanding of what human nature or dog nature or earthworm nature really is about, and that you can't completely transform, you cannot completely take a shy animal, whether it's a two-legged animal or four-legged or a six-legged animal, and turn it into, some kind of superstar extrovert. It's just not going to happen. You can situationally, temporarily get people to do a lot of things under a lot of different constraints and incentives, but you cannot permanently shift their personality. But that doesn't make us any less likely to want to try and to be willing to shell out money for the next big promise from some charismatic trainer or charismatic transformation coach or whoever it is that's trying to sell us that program.
But this is it's so interesting when, like, I find myself sometimes at this place knowing that I will tell a client what their potential is. It's individual or the dog's potential, because I compete in the highest level of dog sports also, and I know what it takes from personality, from the person and the dog to be a world champion. And I know it's not there. Maybe the dog has it, but the person doesn't, or the other way around, or it's a complete misfit for some reasons. If I say that, they will make a phone call and they will get the approval that they can. And they will keep searching for that approval. They will fail, and they will blame that trainer now that the system of training sucks, or the excuses, right, as we were talking, will start pouring, and then they will still not gonna be able to self-check. They will just move to the next big trainer with a big promise. And that will go on. I mean, I see it going on with, like, I know people that would go through 5-6 dogs. That means good 10-15 years of, I will be a world champion. And it's a miserable life. Like, it's really a miserable life to try to chase something that it's not with your capacity. But they always bite that bite, which is the amazing part for me. Like, I just...
So you're looking at narcissism. Okay, so it's going to turn out that each of these bell curves, or each of these characteristics on ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, those characteristics fall in bell curves. That's because they're genetic. The most successful genetic characteristic there is the most common in the gene pool by definition. And it turns out that it's generally the most adaptive for most situations. So for openness, it sounds cool to be really open. Sounds like, oh, that's a really good thing. But Jen Howk here is actually very open, and she's very many times almost not alive. Okay.
Right.
So she, in her first 30 years on this earth, she had many more harrowing life and death kinds of experiences than I did, because I don't have any openness at all, hardly. Okay, so as a result, it's hard for me to stray outside of my Camry more than 15 feet, whereas Jen's, sailing down some river in China. I don't know what actually that's
hanging out with some smugglers, getting all wrapped up with the wrong people. Yeah, I'm as an animal, my openness just makes me more, well, like, what's over there? What's over there? Like, let's just go a little further than everybody else is comfortable with. So there are not many people on the bell curve that have openness that high, because most of us get killed off. You don't survive crossing the road to see what's on the other side. A few of us do survive, so those genes continue in the population. One of my dogs is much more open than the other dog. So yeah, all of these things are on the bell curve. So I think Doug is pointing to the fact that these people who are like, win at any cost, we're going to be the world champ, but my dog's going to do it. These are the same as the parents that are so ill attuned to the what their child actually wants, that they're forcing them, grabbing them by their little arm, and no, you are going to win the spelling bee because it's going to make me look good. That's their narcissism. So on the bell curve of narcissism, which is really they're very disagreeable. That's the way to think about what narcissism really is. They don't even really care about the life experience of that other creature, whether it's a dog or a child or a friend or an employee. All they care about is their glory. They're going to succeed. They're going to get the benefits. And it's just this tunnel vision that is born of this disagreeable, stubborn, we could throw some bad words in there. I don't know how family friendly this podcast is. But.
Oh, it's super. Yeah, it's free. You can go. So, but then how do you handle, like, if you try to sincerely, obviously, help and because it will be help, but that's not what they would want to hear. Is it even possible in some situation? I feel like it's you lose as a
You
Yeah, I mean,
gotta, I mean, you're looking at personality limitation in that sort of sense too. So there are some people that will just not hear reason when it comes to that kind of shitheadedness. You know, they're going
right.
to win. They're going to drag that dog or a succession of dogs or children or whatever. They cannot really be moved out of that place if they are really truly dug in disagreeable narcissists. And you have to have just like you're going to honor and respect your own personality limitations and gifts, you're going to honor and respect them in other people and other animals as well. And so there's a point at which you're like, you know what, I can't. It's also not my job to run your show. Like, it's not your job to run that dog show or your child's show, but it's also not really my job to tell you that it's not your job to run that show. Like, it's live and let live. And there are personalities out there that are going to be damaging the life experiences of other entities. And we do our best, as you know, in the therapeutic capacity, to kind of shine a spotlight on that and to show people what's really happening and why they're really doing that. And a lot of people, when they recognize it, they're like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. I'm doing that out of, we call this distortion, personality distortion. If you're very far over on the bell curve with something like disagreeableness, it means you're functionally going through life with sort of tinted goggles on. You're like in this funhouse mirror where you're not seeing things quite as they are. You're seeing them through the filter of your real extreme personality characteristics. So a lot of people that we talk to, when you confront them with the reality of that, you say, hey, you know, you're being pretty obnoxious when you're dragging your kid to, you know, piano teacher after piano teacher because this succession of piano teachers haven't turned them into Mozart, and you think you're going to find the piano teacher who can. They obviously hate this. You know, you're not creating joy for this. If you confront them and you show them the situation, some people, if they have other personality characteristics that make that possible, they'll be like, oh God, you know, I didn't want to do that. Like I see now what's happening. How can I stop this? How can I interrupt this pattern? And I think you would have the same situation with the dog training world, although it doesn't happen very often. It takes awareness, it takes IQ, it takes a certain humility that coexisting with that narcissism, which you're just not going to find that often.
Which incidentally leads us to a very important insight into how it is that Jen and I try to coach people about living better lives, which is that just as you should see yourself as fixed, see everybody else as fixed. So you're living a life on a chessboard. And if that's a bishop that's on the black, then it's a bishop that's on the black. And if that's a rook, it's a rook. It is what it is. And if it's a disagreeable narcissist, it's a disagreeable narcissist. There's like absolutely no point in arguing with it, okay? The best thing that you can do is to back away from it as fast as possible and don't turn your back on the way out of the room, right? So you've only got 100,000 hours to live, more or less. And every hour you are in it, fighting and arguing, etc., with some disagreeable individual, you're just wasting your time.
Because if you're fighting and arguing, you're trying to change them. That's why you're fighting and arguing. You're trying to like somehow like, what do I need to tell you to like, oh, if only you saw this as I see it, then you would change. You have this, we call this egocentric bias, and you're not changing anybody. You're not changing your dog. You're not changing your boss. You're not changing your husband. You're not changing your kids. You're not changing anybody. So, you know, the sort of true enlightenment in life is not taking anything personally, including the personalities of other people.
Yeah, and that also includes, like you made a question to us about how we feel that we know this and our field does not know it. And is it frustrating? Not particularly. It's frustrating in the sense that in the same way that it's frustrating for you knowing that dogs are being trained badly and that they're sort of experiencing unhappiness where it's unnecessary. But you know, human ignorance is the thief of happiness and longevity. In other words, ignorance is what leads us to waste time and waste life opportunity. It's not a tragedy to have lived life less well than you could have lived it. It's just sort of, it is what it was. And so, you know, if a person stays in some relationship for 25 years working for his dad, or married to somebody that they don't want to be married to, or going to spending every Sunday night with their brother and sister-in-law eating spaghetti, and they hate it all. Okay, is it a tragedy? I don't call it a tragedy. I would say that they left a lot of potential life enjoyment on the table. They suffered unnecessarily, and they suffered unnecessarily behind a distortion in their ability to analyze what was actually in their best interest. And that includes thinking that you're going to change the old man, or that you're going to work out the disagreements with your mate, or that you're going to finally enjoy your sister-in-law's company one day. Now, okay, none of these things are likely to happen, and you're going to know whether or not they're likely within relatively short order, as the evidence is going to pour in that what you're dealing with is fixed personality characteristics, not only in you, but in them. So this leads to actually a very curious insight, is that not only is your personality genetic, and not only is someone else's personality genetic, it is also true that the interaction between you is genetic. Okay? So how much you love a friend is actually genetic. It's an emergent property of those two individuals, and you're not going to change that. The only thing where you see problems transcended is when there was a distortion in communication, you didn't understand something and you misread it. So you actually misread something about the person's personality, and you thought something terrible was true when really it wasn't. You were seeing it through the wrong lens. The classic in this is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. That is the ultimate story of a great love that almost didn't happen because people got the wrong information and didn't see it clearly, okay? So, but believe me, if your kid doesn't like chess, doesn't like piano, in fact, doesn't like riding horses and doesn't like basketball, doesn't like any of the things that you like, and what they really like is Pokemon or whatever it is that they do, and for God's sakes, if they want to play the guitar, let them play the guitar, okay? And let them be who it is that they are, and sort of and give up the notion that we're going to change them into something that's more valuable for us.
And get your ego out of that equation. So much of like, oh, all my kid does is play Pokemon all day, and instead of being a great chess player because I was a great chess player, you were imposing your own analysis of your success on that kid, and you were holding them hostage to your own unlived dreams. And that is a shitty thing to do to a kid. And it is, you don't want to steal their childhood in that way. And you don't want to steal it from your dogs either. Just attend to your own life and your own dreams and your own responsibilities, and, stay as a spiritual leader Byron Katie says, whose business are you in? Are you in your business or somebody else's business? And if you're not in your own business, you're in the wrong business.
And another little note, and that is that a key is to be paying attention to your own frustrations. Okay? So when you are frustrated, that's because that's a signal out of your evolutionary biology that's telling you that you have a discrepancy between where you are and where you think you should be that's puzzling you, and you're frustrated. One of the common problems of that is you're not either recognizing your own genetics or you're not recognizing somebody else's genetics, and therefore you're not recognizing that relationship may not be changeable. Now, that isn't always true. Sometimes there is a fundamental key of success that is being overlooked. That's why you need subject matter experts. That we need to, sometimes there is an informational process that's missing. Sometimes there are fundamentals that need to be learned to close the distance between where we are and where we could be or should be. But that's an important distinction. That's the serenity prayer. Like, what can we change and what can't we change? And the wisdom is in knowing the difference. So Jen and I actually have online, we have a thing called the Living Wisdom Library. And this is, that name wasn't chosen accidentally. Wisdom is literally the ability to know the difference between, what you can change and what you can't change. Because there's much that we cannot change that we are spending tremendous efforts at trying to change. And there are things that we can change that we aren't spending any efforts intelligently. And so this is really where it's at. This is the nature of wisdom, is to try to have that insight. And evolutionary biology and behavior genetics shed tremendous knowledge onto those questions. And that's what we try to do with our clients, and we try to share that knowledge more widely.
Yeah, I know, like I was just thinking, probably some of my audience that were impatient and that couldn't really understand why, what are we talking? This is not dog training. And the ones that have listened so far, I'm sure that they're going to have to go again and listen again, because there is so much that was said that it's like just directly applies to being a dog trainer, being a good dog trainer, of completely, well, it's not even completely different field. It's just you have you actually have the education and you're working with humans versus just being a dog trainer that you grow up as oh no, we're just gonna reinforce behavior and punish behaviors, and we're gonna make things happen and completely disregard genetics. So
this is part of the, I mean, we do walk our talk as well as we can. And, it helps that we're both pretty on the big five. We're both, you could say that we're both fairly agreeable, fairly emotionally stable. So we don't take it too personally if people aren't interested and they're sort of like, well, get back to the dog training. What the heck is all of this nonsense? We're just really here to connect with people who are really interested and can apply this and want to hear more. And they can find us, as Doug was saying, on the Living Wisdom Library. We have 2 different podcasts that we do. We're all over the place.
Which is the second one? The one that I listen to is the Beat Your Genes podcast. Which is the other one that you have?
Yeah, it's one that I just started. So it's Beat Your Genes is very much like clinical questions and people's individual questions and problems through the lens of evolutionary psychology. And my podcast, which Doug is a recurring guest on, we just started it. It's called Hawk Blocked, as a pun on my name. And it's really looking, rather than looking at individual issues, it's looking at broad political, cultural issues through the lens of evolutionary psychology. So we talk about sort of trends in politics and the way that we're changing the way that we interact online and all of those kinds of things.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we will definitely list all of those to go along with the podcast for sure. And what about the book that you are working on? Is it what? Can you give us a little hint?
We don't want to ego trap ourselves by giving you too strict of a deadline, but we're making very good progress. Hopefully by the end of this year, it'll be, I think that's safe to say that we're looking at sort of, the thing is we want to, this book is, this is covering a huge amount of territory that nobody else is really in this space. Nobody is sort of marrying together the clinical and the practical and the academic and everything that we're taking on. It's really half textbook of evolutionary psychology and the kind of history of modern psychology. And then the other half is really a self-help book. What is life about? How do you take these principles and live your best life? So this is quite the project that we've taken on. And as we go through it, we keep discovering new things that need to be included. And we need to give our readers time to give us feedback once we get copies out to our sort of readers and editors. And so it's hard to give an exact deadline, but we've made really good progress. And I would say the end of this year is a safe, at least getting that direction. I don't know what Doug thinks.
I think that's reasonable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we're not under any deadline, that essentially we're going to do exactly the process that we think is the right process, which is no secret sauce, work our fundamentals, and when it's finished, it'll be finished. And so I'm looking forward.
You don't rush Michelangelo.
Right.
Or some, or Michael Jones either. Don't rush it. This
Right.
is this is what we're up to, and it should be quite a read when we're done, I think.
Beautiful. Well, I think hopefully I really hope that everybody that's listening and watching changes their, how they see genetics and how genetics affect behavior, and opens a new chapter for them with there is so much more to learn than just reinforce and punish. And yeah, that I was very, very happy. I know there is so much more that we can talk. Like I would love to talk about nutrition. Like I would love to talk about it because it's just as important as everything else that we never really, I cannot even start because
we're happy to come back if you'd like to chat again.
Yes,
so there's limitless territory.
Thank you. This will be very nice because again, when we're talking, especially when we're talking, well, not even I was gonna say like high-end competition and sports and how important it is to, what you eat and how your brain and everything gets affected. But even a pet dog and just any person, what you eat, everything pretty much starts there or ends there, right? But yeah, I will definitely, we will definitely have another one at some point. Thank you so much for joining me. And as I said, we're gonna list all the 2 podcasts and the websites, and I'm sure there will be a lot of followers that will just like me. That's really like, guys, if you're watching, this is a lot of stuff that I talk about. That's how I got interested in, and that's where it really kind of came from, thanks to Dr. Lisle and Dr. Jen.
It's wonderful to connect with you. Always a great pleasure to brag about my dogs, and so any excuse. So I can't believe how good Mellie's been this whole time. Like, let me just display my child over here.
I know. You said that she will do something. She's been so good.
No, she's well, they're getting older now, so they just basically sleep all the time. So, but she's a good girl. She's just very misunderstood.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much.